On a routine cross-country flight from New York to Los Angeles, a quiet elderly professor named Dr. Samuel Williams made a simple request for a meal he had paid for. The response he received was not a polite apology, but a cold, sneering denial from a flight attendant named Caroline Hayes, a woman who judged the book by its cover and found it wanting. What Caroline couldn't possibly have known was that her casual act of cruelty, her dismissive wave of a hand, wasn't just an insult to an anonymous passenger in seat 28B. It was an insult delivered directly to the father of Dr. Alia Williams Carter, the senior vice president of in-flight customer experience for Ryanair. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's a story about hidden power, quiet dignity, and the day karma booked a non-stop flight to justice. The air in the terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport thrummed with the familiar, chaotic symphony of travel. Announcements echoed from unseen speakers. The wheels of roller bags clicked a frantic rhythm on the polished floors, and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations filled the cavernous space. For Dr. Samuel Williams, it was all just background noise. At 68, the retired professor of American literature moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that seemed to create a small pocket of calm around him. His tweed jacket, though slightly worn at the elbows, was immaculate. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes held the patient, observant look of a man who had spent a lifetime finding meaning in the written word. He was flying to Los Angeles to meet his newest grandchild, a tiny girl named Maya, and a quiet joy radiated from him. He clutched his boarding pass for Orion Air Flight OA712, a non-stop journey that was the last hurdle between him and a long-awaited cuddle. Boarding was an orderly affair. He found his seat, 28B, a middle seat in the main cabin. He was not a man who demanded luxury. He just wanted to get there. He settled in, placing a well-loved copy of James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain on his lap. He nodded politely to the young woman on his right and the businessman on his left, receiving distracted smiles in return. As the cabin filled, the flight attendants began their pre-flight dance. One of them, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, moved down the aisle with an air of brisk, almost militaristic efficiency. Her name tag read Caroline. She was Caroline Hayes, a senior flight attendant with 22 years of service. To her, the passengers were not individuals. They were a manifest, a series of potential problems to be managed. Her smile was a thin, practiced line that never reached her cold blue eyes. Dr. Williams watched her for a moment. He saw her snap at a young man who was slow to put his bag in the overhead compartment and speak condescendingly to a non-native English speaker who had a question about her seat. He felt a familiar, low thrum of unease, a sixth sense honed by decades of navigating spaces where his presence was merely tolerated, not welcome. He pushed the feeling aside. He was just a man on a plane, on his way to see his family. The flight took off smoothly, climbing through the clouds into the brilliant, unforgiving blue of the upper atmosphere. About an hour into the flight, the familiar rattle of the service carts began. The scent of coffee and prepackaged food slowly wafted through the cabin. When the cart reached his row, it was attended by Caroline and a much younger, brighter-faced attendant named Chloe. "Drink selection?" Caroline asked, her tone flat, her eyes already looking past him to the next row. "Just some water, please. And I believe a meal is included with this ticket?" Dr. Williams asked gently, his voice calm and academic. He had made sure to book a fare that included a hot meal, knowing the 6-hour flight would span the entire afternoon. Caroline's eyes flickered down to his boarding pass, then back up to his face. For a split second, her professional mask slipped, replaced by a flash of something else. Annoyance. Dismissal. "We're serving from the front of the cabin to the back," she said, her voice clipped. "We might be out of certain options by the time we get to you." "Oh, that's quite all right," Dr. Williams replied with a small, gracious smile. "Whatever is available will be just fine." She said nothing, simply handing him a plastic cup of water before pushing the cart along. Chloe, the younger attendant, offered him a brief apologetic smile before following. Dr. Williams thought little of it. He opened his book and returned to the world of Harlem in the 1930s, the drone of the engines a backdrop to the powerful prose. He was a patient man. He could wait. but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been assessed and, in some unspoken way, dismissed. The quiet man in 28B was about to learn that on Flight OA72, patience would not be a virtue, it would be a liability. Another hour crawled by. The service cars had long since completed their first pass, and the smells of chicken and pasta had faded, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of the cabin. Passengers around Dr. Williams were finishing their meals, their plastic trays littered with crumpled napkins and empty foil containers. Yet his own tray table remained bare, save for his book and the now empty water cup. He wasn't one to make a fuss. He understood the logistics of airline service could be complex, but hunger had begun to gnaw at him, a dull ache in his stomach. He saw Chloe, the younger flight attendant, making her way down the aisle collecting trash. He caught her eye and gave a small, polite wave. She approached with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything, sir?" "I was just wondering about the meal service," he said softly, so as not to disturb the sleeping passenger by the window. "I'm afraid my row might have been missed." Chloe's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then concern, crossed her face. "Oh, of course. Row 28, you said? Let me go and check on that for you immediately. I'm so sorry about the delay." She scurried off toward the galley at the back of the plane. Dr. Williams felt a small sense of relief. It was a simple oversight, he told himself, easily corrected. But a few minutes later, it wasn't Chloe who returned. It was Caroline Hayes. She stood over his seat, her arms crossed, her posture radiating impatience. "There's a problem?" she asked. The question was not an offer of help, it was an accusation. "No problem at all," Dr. Williams said, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Your colleague was just going to check on my meal. I think I was missed during the service." Caroline let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of pure theatrical exasperation. "As I explained earlier, we serve from the front. We ran out of the complimentary hot meals an hour ago." The lie was so blatant, so effortlessly delivered, it momentarily stunned him. The businessman in the aisle seat, who was currently picking at the last of his chicken and rice, shot a quick, surprised look from his tray to Caroline's face before quickly looking away, clearly not wanting to get involved. I see," Dr. Williams said, his voice quiet. "But my ticket definitely included a meal, and I see others around me were served." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Sir, some passengers have special pre-orders. Others are premium status flyers. The economy cabin allotment was exhausted. I can offer you a complimentary bag of pretzels." She said the word pretzels as if it were a consolation prize for a child. This was no longer an oversight. This was a decision. He was being singled out, though for what reason, he could not fathom. Was it because he was an older black man, traveling alone in a simple tweed jacket? Did she assume he was on the cheapest possible ticket? That he wouldn't know his entitlements? That he wouldn't complain? "No, thank you," he said with quiet dignity. "I would prefer the meal I am entitled to." "And I am telling you," she retorted, her voice rising slightly, attracting the attention of nearby passengers, "that there are none left." From the back of the plane, Chloe watched, her face a mask of distress. She had found an extra meal, a vegetarian pasta, in the galley warmer. It was right there. She had started to bring it out when Caroline had intercepted her, her face like stone. "I will handle this," Caroline had hissed, her voice a low threat. Now Chloe stood frozen, a junior employee utterly intimidated by the senior attendant's iron will. A young man in seat 27F, a tech developer named Mark Jensen, had been listening to the entire exchange over his noise-canceling headphones. He paused his movie. He'd seen Caroline's behavior earlier and had been put off by it. Now seeing this gentle old man being so publicly and unreasonably rebuffed, he felt a surge of anger. Without making it obvious, he angled his phone on his lap and pressed record. "Perhaps you could just double-check in the galley?" Dr. Williams suggested, his patience wearing thin, though his tone remained even. "I don't need to double-check," Caroline snapped, her voice now sharp and laced with finality. "I know my inventory. It's pretzels or nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other passengers to attend to." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Dr. Williams sitting in a pool of uncomfortable silence. The humiliation was a palpable thing, a hot flush that spread across his cheeks. He wasn't just hungry anymore. He felt diminished, rendered invisible. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a slow, deep breath, and reopened his book. But the words on the page were a blur. The story he was now a part of was far more compelling and far more painful. The cabin settled back into its rhythmic drone, but the atmosphere around row 28 had changed. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The businessman to Dr. Williams's left studiously avoided eye contact, engrossed in a spreadsheet on his laptop. The young woman on his right pretended to be asleep. They were witnesses who chose not to see, their silence a form of passive complicity. Dr. Williams did not try to engage them. He understood their reluctance. Confrontation at 30,000 feet was a prospect few relished. Instead, he sat with the quiet, burning shame of the incident. It wasn't about the food anymore. It had ceased to be about a simple tray of lukewarm chicken or pasta long ago. It was about respect. It was about the casual, cruel exercise of petty power. Caroline Hayes had looked at him and, for reasons of her own, decided he was unworthy. Unworthy of a meal, unworthy of courtesy, unworthy of the truth. He thought of his daughter, Aliyah. She was a force of nature, brilliant, determined, and with a fierce sense of justice that he had always admired. He had raised her to believe in her own worth, to never let anyone make her feel small. And here he was, her father, being made to feel precisely that. A part of him wanted to stand up, to walk to the galley and demand to speak to the captain, to cause a scene that could not be ignored. But that was not his way. His entire life had been a testament to the power of quiet dignity over loud aggression. He had navigated the often treacherous waters of academia, a black man in a predominantly white field, not with outrage, but with excellence and unassailable integrity. He would not allow this woman, with her bitter heart and thin smile, to strip him of that. He would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. His refusal to be provoked would be its own form of protest. About 30 minutes later, Chloe, the junior attendant, appeared at his elbow. Her eyes were filled with genuine remorse. She held out a small snack box and a can of ginger ale. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "I am so sorry. Please take this. It's from the first-class cabin. Caroline won't know." Dr. Williams looked from her earnest, worried face to the box in her hands. He saw not only an offer of food, but an act of quiet rebellion. He appreciated the gesture more than she could know, but accepting it felt like a concession, like agreeing that he should be satisfied with a secret handout instead of what he was openly owed. He gave her a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Chloe. Your kindness means a great deal to me, but I will be all right. Please don't get yourself into any trouble on my account." Her face fell. "But you haven't eaten." "I will be fine," he repeated gently but firmly. He turned a page in his book, a clear, if polite signal that the conversation was over. Chloe retreated, looking utterly defeated. She knew the older attendant was in the wrong, but she felt powerless, caught between her conscience and the unwritten rules of the cabin crew hierarchy. Meanwhile, in seat 27F, Mark Jensen had stopped his recording, but he continued to watch. He saw the whispered exchange with Chloe. He saw Dr. Williams' dignified refusal. He looked at the elderly professor, sitting stoically with an unread book on his lap, and felt a profound sense of injustice. He saved the video file to a secure folder on his phone and made a mental note of the flight number and the lead flight attendant's name. He didn't know what he would do with the footage, but he knew that what he had witnessed was wrong, and the evidence of it was now resting in the palm of his hand. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of forced indifference for Dr. Williams. He did not ask for another cup of water. He did not ring the call button. He simply endured. When the captain announced their initial descent into Los Angeles, a wave of relief washed over him. Soon this ordeal would be over. He would be on the ground with his family. He would put this unpleasantness behind him. As the plane taxied to the gate at LAX, Caroline Hayes walked the aisle, her face a mask of saccharine sweetness, thanking everyone for flying Orion Air. When she passed row 28, she pointedly ignored Dr. Williams, her gaze sliding right over him as if he were an empty seat. It was the final, petty insult. Dr. Williams said nothing. He waited patiently for the cabin to empty, gathered his single carry-on bag, and disembarked. As he stepped into the jet bridge, the hunger was a sharp pain, but it was nothing compared to the weary weight of the last few hours. He pulled out his phone, his fingers scrolling through his contacts until he found the one he was looking for. He pressed the call button, not to complain, but simply to hear a friendly voice, to be reminded of who he was outside of seat 28B. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Dad, you landed. How was the flight?" The sound of his daughter's voice, clear and full of love, was the first good thing he'd felt all day. "Aaliyah, my dear," he said, his voice tired. "The flight was eventful." Dr. Aaliyah Williams Carter sat in her glass-walled office on the 14th floor of the Orion Air corporate headquarters near LAX. The panoramic view showed planes taking off and landing in a majestic, ceaseless ballet, a testament to the industry she helped command. Her title was prominently displayed on a sleek placard on her desk. Dr. Aaliyah Williams Carter, Senior Vice President, In-Flight Customer Experience. She was a picture of corporate power and grace. Her suit was impeccably tailored, her hair styled in elegant locks, and her desk was an oasis of organized efficiency. But when her personal phone rang with the picture of her father, the corporate executive vanished, replaced instantly by a loving daughter. "Dad, you landed. How was the flight?" she asked, her voice warm as she swiveled in her chair to look out at the airfield. "Aaliyah, my dear," he replied. She immediately caught the weariness in his tone. It was a subtle thing, a slight rasp, a lack of his usual buoyant energy. The flight was eventful. Her internal alarms went off. Her father was a master of understatement. Eventful could mean anything from a talkative seatmate to a genuine problem. "What happened? Are you okay?" she asked, her focus sharpening. "I'm perfectly fine physically, just a bit hungry and disappointed," he said. He didn't want to burden her. She had a high-stress job, a family. His minor discomfort on an airplane seemed trivial. It was just a small matter of some unpleasantness with one of the flight attendants. Aaliyah leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her pen. "Unpleasantness? Dad, talk to me. What happened?" Reluctantly, Dr. Williams recounted the story. He told it in his typical, measured way, without embellishment or overt emotion. He described the initial request, Caroline's dismissive attitude, the blatant lie about running out of meals, the public refusal, and the offer of pretzels. He framed it as a peculiar case of poor customer service, but Aaliyah heard what he wasn't saying. She heard the undercurrent of humiliation in his voice. She knew her father's pride, his deep-seated dignity. For him to even mention it, the incident must have cut him deeply. "And you said she served the man next to you?" Aaliyah asked, her voice now dangerously calm. "Yes." He seemed a bit embarrassed by it, actually. "What was her name, Dad?" "The flight attendant." "I believe her name tag said Caroline, a blonde woman perhaps in her late 40s. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. She knew exactly who he was talking about. Caroline Hayes, a senior attendant with a file thick with commendations for efficiency, but also dotted with a troubling pattern of passenger complaints. Complaints that were always cleverly refuted, always dismissed as misunderstandings or difficult passengers. She was known internally as being old school and difficult, but she was protected by her seniority and a powerful union representative. "Dad, which flight were you on?" Aaliyah asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the pen. "Orion Air, of course. Your airline," he said, a hint of irony in his voice. "Flight OA712 from JFK." The pen in Aaliyah's hand snapped in two. Ink bled onto a stack of quarterly reports. She didn't even notice. The world outside her window, the soaring planes and the bustling airport, seemed to fade away. All she could see was a picture of her gentle, dignified, 68-year-old father being denied a meal and humiliated by one of her own employees. An employee whose training, conduct, and professional standards were her direct responsibility. This wasn't a corporate problem anymore. This was personal. "Aaliyah, are you there?" Her father's voice brought her back. "I'm here, Dad," she said, her voice a low, controlled whisper. "Where are you right now?" "Just heading towards baggage claim. Your husband, Michael, should be here any minute." "Okay, you go home with Michael. Get some rest. You hug Maya for me. I'll see you tonight. Don't worry about this. I will handle it." Aaliyah, please don't make a fuss, he started, but she cut him off. It's already been made, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I love you, Dad. She hung up the phone and sat in silence for a full minute, a storm of cold, precise fury gathering within her. She had spent 10 years of her life climbing the corporate ladder at Orion Air, fighting stereotypes and breaking barriers to reach a position of influence. She had championed initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She had personally overseen the rewriting of the customer service handbooks, emphasizing dignity and respect for every single passenger. And one of her own flight attendants, on one of her own planes, had treated her father like he was nothing. Caroline Hayes had made a critical, career-ending mistake. She had assumed Dr. Samuel Williams was just another anonymous black man in a cheap seat. She had no idea she had just targeted the emotional cornerstone of the most powerful woman in her entire chain of command. Aaliyah turned to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She pulled up the crew manifest for OA712. There it was. Lead flight attendant, Caroline Hayes. She pulled up the passenger manifest. S. Williams, seat 28B. Then she did something that would change everything. She cross-referenced the flight manifest with the contact information provided during booking. She would not rely solely on her father's account. She needed witnesses. She would find out exactly what happened in row 28, and she would bring the full weight of her position down on the person responsible. The hunt had begun. Aaliyah Williams Carter moved with the chilling precision of a hunter. The initial rage had subsided, replaced by an icy, methodical resolve. She knew that in the corporate world, emotion was a liability. Action required evidence. Irrefutable, unimpeachable proof. Her first step was to check the official records. She accessed the in-flight incident report database for Flight 072. As she expected, it was blank. Caroline Hayes was too cunning to document her own misconduct. She had created a situation where it was her word, the word of a 22-year veteran, against that of a passenger she had already profiled as insignificant. That was her standard operating procedure. But this time was different. This time, the passenger had a daughter who could access every system in the airline. Aaliyah's next move was to pull the entire passenger list for the flight, focusing on the seats immediately surrounding 28B, rows 26 through 30. She cross-referenced their names with Orion Air's loyalty program. The businessman in 28C, a Mr. Henderson, was a platinum-tier flyer. He traveled weekly. He would be reluctant to get involved and risk his comfortable relationship with the airline. The young woman in 28A had no status. She was likely a non-confrontational traveler. Aaliyah needed someone with nothing to lose, in a strong sense of right and wrong. Her eyes landed on the name in seat 27F, Mark Jensen. He was a silver-tier member, a frequent but not obsessive flyer. His booking notes indicated he worked in the tech industry. Aaliyah knew the stereotype was often true. Tech workers were often digitally savvy, socially conscious, and less intimidated by corporate authority. He was a promising candidate. She located his contact number and, taking a deep breath, dialed it herself. It was unorthodox for a senior VP to call a passenger directly about a service issue, but this was an unorthodox situation. Mark Jensen was in the back of a rideshare, heading into Santa Monica, when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? Good afternoon, Mr. Jensen. My name is Dr. Aaliyah Williams Carter. I'm the Senior Vice President of In-Flight Customer Experience with Orion Air. Mark sat up straighter. Oh, okay. Is there a problem with my flight miles or something? No, not at all. I'm calling because I'm personally investigating a serious customer service complaint from today's flight OA712 from New York. Our records show you were seated in 27F. I was hoping you might be able to help me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mark's mind raced. He knew exactly what she was calling about. He had been debating all afternoon whether he should send an email, post the video online, or just let it go. Now the airline had come to him. Does this have to do with the elderly gentleman in the row behind me? Mark asked carefully. Aaliyah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Yes, Mr. Jensen, it does. His name is Dr. Williams. Look, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, Mark began, a note of caution in his voice. Mr. Jensen, Aaliyah interrupted, her voice firm but reassuring. Getting the right person in trouble is exactly my intention. My only goal here is to get a clear, unbiased picture of what occurred. Anything you can share would be immensely helpful and held in the strictest confidence. Mark made his decision. What happened was completely out of line. The flight attendant, Caroline, I think her name was rude to him from the start. He asked for a meal and she flat out lied and said they were out. I was right there. I heard her. I saw the guy next to him eating the exact meal she claimed they didn't have. She was loud, condescending, and she was trying to humiliate him. Aaliyah closed her eyes, her father's understated account, now painted in vivid, ugly color by this stranger's testimony. Did you happen to see anything else? Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second. I did more than see it, he said. I recorded it. The silence on Aaliyah's end was profound. You have a video? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. About a minute and a half of it, from the point where she came back to his seat to when she told him it was pretzels or nothing and walked off. The audio is crystal clear. Aaliyah felt a dizzying mix of fury and vindication. It was the smoking gun. Caroline Hayes hadn't just broken company policy, she had created digital evidence of her malice. Mr. Jensen, Mark, she said, her professional tone softening. I cannot thank you enough. Would you be willing to send me that file? I can give you a secure corporate email address. This footage would be instrumental in ensuring this employee is held accountable and that no other passenger is ever treated this way again. Absolutely, Mark said, his own conviction solidifying. She deserves to be held accountable. That man, Dr. Williams, he handled it with so much class. He didn't deserve that. No, Aaliyah agreed, a lump forming in her throat. He certainly did not. She gave Mark her direct email address and thanked him again, promising to follow up. After she hung up, she stared at her computer screen, waiting. Less than 5 minutes later, a new email notification popped up. The subject line read, Video from Flight OA712. She clicked it open, downloaded the attached file, and pressed play. The video was shot from a low angle, but the subjects were clear. She saw her father, his face etched with confusion and quiet hurt. And she saw Caroline Hayes, her expression a mask of contempt. She heard the dialogue exactly as Mark had described, but with a venomous tone the transcript could never capture. She heard the sneer in Caroline's voice as she offered him pretzels. She watched it once, then she watched it again. And a third time. With the video saved and backed up, she drafted an email. To Caroline Hayes, Chloe Vance. CC, Robert Patterson, VP of Human Resources. David Chen, CEO. Subject, mandatory meeting regarding flight OA712. A meeting has been scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in Conference Room 4 to discuss a serious incident that occurred on flight OA712. Your attendance is mandatory. Union representation is advised. She hit send. The pieces were now in place. Tomorrow, Caroline Hayes would walk into a meeting thinking it was her word against a passenger's. She had no idea she was about to be confronted by the passenger's daughter, the senior vice president, and a jury of her own recorded actions. The air in Conference Room 4 was heavy, cold, and unnaturally still. It was a room designed to project power, a chamber where careers were made and broken around a vast, mirror-polished mahogany table that reflected the muted gray light of the overcast morning. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, almost subliminal hum of the building's climate control. On the 14th floor, the city's noise was a distant rumor, leaving nothing to distract from the tension that was about to unfold. At the head of this intimidating table sat Dr. Aaliyah Williams Carter. She was a statue carved from ice and resolve. Her posture was perfect. Her hands rested calmly on a closed, leather-bound portfolio. Inside, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her expression was a mask of serene, executive control. To her right sat Robert Patterson, the Vice President of Human Resources. He was a portly man in his late 50s, known for his mild demeanor, which belied a mind as sharp and unyielding as a corporate lawyer's. He adjusted his glasses, his face a neutral canvas, ready to absorb the proceedings. The heavy oak door opened with a soft whoosh, and Chloe Vance entered. The junior flight attendant looked small and lost in the cavernous room. Her uniform, usually crisp, seemed to hang on her trembling frame. Her eyes, wide with anxiety, darted from Aaliyah's impassive face to Robert's, searching for some hint of what was to come. She clutched her hands together so tightly her knuckles were white, taking a seat far down the table as if trying to make herself a smaller target. She had replayed the incident 100 times in her mind, her shame at her own inaction a bitter taste in her mouth. A few minutes ticked by in that crushing silence before the door opened again. This time, Caroline Hayes strode in, and the atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. She was not cowed, she was combative. Flanked by her union representative, a stern, bulldog-faced man named Bill Thompson, she radiated an aura of indignant defiance. Her chin was high, her gaze sharp and accusatory. She had been through these corporate inquisitions before. She saw them as bureaucratic hurdles, tedious formalities to be navigated with a well-practiced script of deflection and feigned concern. She assessed Aaliyah with a flicker of professional jealousy. This was the kind of cushy executive job she felt she deserved after 2 decades of dealing with the public. "Dr. Williams Carter, Mr. Patterson," she began, her tone clipped and devoid of warmth. "Bill and I were able to clear our schedules. I trust this won't take long. I have a flight to prep for this afternoon." "Your afternoon flight has been reassigned, Ms. Hayes," Aaliyah stated, her voice calm and level, yet carrying a weight that made the room feel even colder. "Please have a seat." Caroline exchanged a look with Bill as they sat down opposite Aaliyah. The first crack in her armor appeared. A reassigned flight was not standard procedure for a simple passenger complaint. This was more serious than she'd anticipated. Aaliyah allowed the silence to stretch for another moment, letting their confidence curdle into unease. Then she began. "We are here this morning to conduct a formal review of an incident that took place on yesterday's flight OA712 from JFK. The incident involves a passenger interaction at seat 28B concerning the denial of a meal service." Bill Thompson leaned forward, placing his beefy hands on the table. "With all due respect, Dr. Williams Carter, a disputed meal service hardly warrants a senior VP-level meeting. Caroline has a spotless 22-year record of service and passenger management." She explained in her initial pre-report that the passenger became agitated and she followed standard de-escalation protocols perfectly. Caroline nodded in agreement, her expression one of weary professionalism. "That's correct. The gentleman, I believe his name was Williams, was upset. It's understandable. But on a full flight, cabin resources are finite. I explained the situation to him calmly and repeatedly. When he continued to argue, I disengaged to prevent further disruption to the cabin. It's all in the manual, page 47, section B." She delivered the lie with the practiced ease of a seasoned performer. To her, this was just another customer who didn't understand the rules, another man who thought the world revolved around him. Aaliyah listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving Caroline's face. "So, to be clear, your official position is that the passenger, Dr. Williams, was the agitator, and you were the professional simply doing your job according to protocol?" "Precisely," Caroline confirmed, a hint of a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "It's a he said, she said situation, and in these cases, the record and experience of the senior crew member should carry the appropriate weight." "I see," Aaliyah said softly. She paused, letting Caroline's arrogant declaration settle in the silent room. She looked from Caroline's defiant face to Bill's smug expression, then to Chloe's terrified one. "There's just one complication with the he said, she said narrative, Ms. Hayes." Aaliyah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it seemed to boom in the stillness. "The passenger you denied a meal, the man you publicly humiliated, the agitator you profiled as a problem to be managed, Dr. Samuel Williams, is my father." The statement landed like a physical blow. The silence that followed was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. Chloe Vance let out a small, strangled gasp, her eyes locking with Aaliyah's in dawning horror and understanding. Bill Thompson's jaw literally dropped. He stared at Aaliyah, his face a comical mask of disbelief, the script he'd prepared for a routine disciplinary meeting now utterly useless. And Caroline. Carolyn's face went through a rapid, devastating transformation. The defiant confidence shattered, replaced by a wave of stark, white-hot panic. Her carefully constructed reality had just been annihilated. This wasn't a random passenger. This was the father of a senior vice president. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had just dropped away from beneath her chair. You can't, she stammered, her voice a reedy croak. This is a setup. It's a conflict of interest. You can't be here. Robert Patterson spoke for the first time, his calm voice cutting through her panic. As I believe I mentioned in the email, Dr. Williams Carter is here to present the preliminary findings. I am the impartial arbiter who will make the final determination based on all presented evidence. The integrity of this process is assured, Ms. Hayes. But there is no evidence, Caroline insisted, her voice rising with desperation. It is my word against his, against your father's. My father never filed a complaint. He never even intended to speak of it again, Aaliyah countered, her voice now laced with a cold fire. But let's move past my father's word. Let's talk about your colleagues. Ms. Vance, she said, her tone softening as she addressed Chloe, please tell Mr. Patterson what you observed after Dr. Williams was first denied his meal. All eyes turned to Chloe. Caroline shot her a venomous glare, a silent, desperate command to stay quiet. Chloe trembled, twisting her hands in her lap. This was the moment. She could lie, protect her hostile senior, and keep her job safe. Or she could speak the truth. She looked at Aaliyah's face, seeing not just an executive, but a daughter fighting for her father's dignity. She took a deep, shaky breath. I went to the galley, Chloe began, her voice barely audible. I knew he was supposed to have a meal. I checked the warmers myself. There was one left, a vegetarian pasta. It was set aside as an extra. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I was bringing it out to him when Carolyn stopped me. She told me to go to the back and organize the drink cart. She said, I will handle this. She knew the meal was there. She chose not to give it to him. She's a trainee. She's mistaken, Caroline blurted out, her voice shrill. She doesn't understand the inventory protocols for long-haul flights. So now, Aaliyah said, her voice dangerously quiet as she ticked off the points on her fingers, my father is a liar. Your junior colleague is a liar. An interesting pattern. It seems everyone is lying except for you, Ms. Hayes. In a situation like this, it would be so helpful if we had a neutral, unbiased witness. Someone who could show us exactly what happened. She picked up the small remote control from the table. The click of the button was like the cocking of a hammer. Fortunately for us, we do. The 80-inch screen on the wall flickered to life. The unsteady, low-angle footage from Mark Jensen's phone filled the room. The audio was shockingly clear. The entire boardroom watched in stunned silence as the scene played out. They saw Dr. Williams, his face a portrait of polite confusion. They saw Caroline approaching, her body language radiating contempt. They heard her voice dripping with condescension, echo through the high-fidelity speakers. As I explained earlier, we ran out. Robert Patterson leaned closer to the screen, his calm facade finally cracking, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Bill Thompson sank back in his chair, his face pale, running a hand over his mouth as he watched his client's career immolate before his eyes. I am telling you that there are none left. It's pretzels or nothing. The video showed Caroline's sneer, the dismissive wave of her hand, the finality with which she turned her back on him. When the video ended, the screen went black, but the image was seared into the minds of everyone present. The silence that returned was heavier than before, thick with shame and undeniable truth. Caroline Hayes was a ruin. The color had drained from her face, leaving a pasty gray mask of utter devastation. She stared at the blank screen, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't comprehend how her private act of cruelty had become a public exhibit. Aaliyah finally stood up, the sound of her chair pushing back seeming unnaturally loud. She looked directly at Caroline, but she spoke to the entire room. For 10 years, I have worked to make this airline a symbol of service and respect. We have policies about dignity, inclusion, and the fundamental right of every single person who boards our planes to be treated as a valued guest. You did not just deny a man a meal, Ms. Hayes. You saw a quiet, elderly black man traveling alone, and you made an assumption. You decided he was insignificant. You wielded the tiny amount of power you have to humiliate him because you thought you could. You thought there would be no consequences. You are the very thing I have worked my entire career to eradicate from this company. She gathered her portfolio. It was only then that Caroline finally broke. A choked sob escaped her lips. "Please," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a desperate, pathetic rush. "Dr. Williams Carter. Aaliyah. Please. It was a bad day. I was stressed. My son's tuition is due. I have a mortgage. Please, I'll apologize. I'll do anything. It was a mistake." Aaliyah paused at the door, her back to the weeping woman. She turned her head slightly, her profile sharp and unforgiving. "A mistake is forgetting to offer someone sugar for their coffee. A mistake is billing a passenger twice for Wi-Fi," she said, her voice devoid of any pity. "You, Ms. Hayes, made a choice. You chose to be cruel. You chose to lie. And now we will make our choice." She opened the door and walked out, leaving Caroline Hayes to drown in the wreckage of her own making. The silence of the room her final, damning verdict. The fallout from the meeting was swift and decisive. With the irrefutable video evidence, the testimony from Chloe, and the clear violation of not only company policy but also federal anti-discrimination laws, Caroline Hayes' position was untenable. The union, faced with a case they couldn't possibly win and the risk of negative publicity for defending such behavior, quietly withdrew its most strident support. Robert Patterson, the head of HR, made the determination. Caroline Hayes was terminated from Orion Air, effective immediately. The official reason cited was gross misconduct, including discriminatory behavior towards a passenger and dishonesty during a corporate investigation. A note was placed in her permanent record, a black mark that would follow her throughout the aviation industry, making it nearly impossible for her to be hired by another major airline. Her 22-year career did not end with a retirement party and a golden parachute. It ended with a security escort to her locker and a cardboard box full of her personal effects. But Aaliyah knew that firing one employee wasn't a solution. It was a symptom of a larger disease. Her father's humiliation had exposed a crack in the very foundation of the customer experience she was hired to build. This couldn't just be about punishment, it had to be about change. Over the next 6 months, Aaliyah spearheaded the most significant overhaul of in-flight services training in Orion Air's history. It was dubbed the Dignity Initiative. Working with leading DEI consultants, she implemented mandatory, scenario-based implicit bias training for all 10,000 of Orion's flight attendants. The training used anonymized but real-life examples, with the story of the professor and the pretzels becoming a central, powerful case study on how petty prejudice could have catastrophic corporate consequences. She revamped the complaint system, creating a direct line for passengers to submit feedback, including video and audio files, via the airline's app, ensuring that complaints were seen by a specialized oversight team, not just the senior attendant on the flight. Chloe Vance was not punished for her initial inaction. Instead, Aaliyah promoted her to a training role, empowering her to share her story with new hires, teaching them the importance of speaking up and the courage it takes to break the chain of command when witnessing misconduct. The story, as these things often do, leaked. An internal source told an aviation blogger, and soon the tale of the flight attendant who messed with the wrong man's father went viral. Orion Air, under Aaliyah's guidance, didn't hide from it. They released a statement confirming an incident had occurred and detailing the sweeping changes they were implementing as a result. The negative press was short-lived, replaced by a wave of public support for their transparency and decisive action. Booking numbers actually saw an increase. A year later, life had found a new equilibrium for everyone involved. Dr. Samuel Williams sat in a comfortable armchair, his granddaughter Maya babbling on his lap as he read her a story. He rarely thought about the flight anymore, but when he did, it wasn't with anger. It was with a deep, abiding pride in the daughter he had raised. A woman who had turned his moment of private humiliation into a catalyst for public good. Mark Jensen received a personal letter of thanks from Orion Air's CEO, David Chen, along with 100,000 bonus miles and an upgrade to top-tier platinum status for life. He became an unofficial legend in online travel forums. And Caroline Hayes? Karma had delivered its bill. Unable to find work in her field, she was forced to sell her large suburban home. The last anyone had heard, she was working as a cashier at a big box store, her face a permanent mask of sour resentment. She would often watch planes fly overhead, a bitter reminder of the career she had thrown away with a single arrogant decision. She had judged a man by his simple tweed jacket, and in doing so, had her own life stripped down to its barest threads. She had learned, far too late, that the quietest people can have the most powerful voices, and that sometimes the passenger in the middle seat holds all the cards. The story of Dr. Williams and Carolyn Hayes is a potent reminder that our actions, especially those made when we think no one important is watching, have consequences that can ripple out in unimaginable ways. Respect is not a premium service to be offered only to those we deem worthy. It is a basic human currency, and the cost of devaluing it can be immense. Caroline's story isn't just about losing a job. It's about the profound personal bankruptcy that comes from a life led by prejudice. What did you think of the airline's response and Aaliyah's initiative? Was Caroline's ultimate fate a just example of karma? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every subscription helps us continue to find and share these incredible true life narratives. Thank you for listening.